Welcome to week 3 of the 6 and 6 campaign, where I, Amy Rosen, your national president, is studying and taking all 6 AREs in 6 weeks. So thus far, I've gone through 2 exams. The first one I did was programming and analysis. The second exam was project planning and design. And this week, I'm doing project development and documentation. So before I actually talk about what this third exam is all about and what to expect, I want to do a quick recap of last week, because those of you that turned in on Friday, you already heard how I did, but in case you tuned in last week on Monday, you know that NCARB actually gives you a score report and a breakdown of how you did in all the different sections. So, just as per usual, to be as transparent with you all as possible, I wanted to show you how that did. But before I show you that, I wanted to give you another little update about how studying went last week. So I shared a bunch of resources and books and documents that are also really useful to utilize for that project planning and design exam. Unfortunately, since I was at an AIA board retreat last week, I was only able to get through really the Black Spectacles videos and the Ballast study guide. So because of that, I really didn't get to hone in on any of those structural diagrams or details, and I learned that the Black Spectacles videos are really just an intro. They shouldn't necessarily be your primary study material, but they're a really great way to learn what the topics on the exam are and the method of thinking that you have to go into these exams with. So, without further ado, let's see how I did on those sections. So here you can see my Airy score report. You see that lovely giant fail in bright blue letters, and then you scroll down and you can see that they're actually documenting how I'm doing on all of the exams. By the end of the 6 weeks, my score report will show me whether I passed or failed all 6 of them, which is pretty cool. And then as you're scrolling down, just a reminder of what this exam covered. It was testing me on environmental conditions and context, codes and regulations, building systems, materials and assemblies, project integration of program and systems, and then project cost and budgeting. All 5 of these sections, as you can probably see here, are really, really robust and they're really complex. This exam and the exam I'm doing this week are really kind of referred to as the monsters of the 6. These 2 are both really big, and they're dealing with the primary portions of the design process. So scrolling through, you'll see I didn't do as well as last week, probably because of how intense this exam was and the fact that I really want to show you guys how much you need to study for these 2 in particular. Project planning and design, based on how much I got to study last week and how much I wish I could have studied, I would recommend maybe a few months, probably around 3, I can tell just from perusing the Airy 5.0 community, but I'm going to continue doing research to my friends who have passed this exam to see how long they studied, so at the end of the 6-week campaign, I can really tell you guys the primary recommended study tactic. But you can see that I got level 3, which was performance at this level does not meet the minimum, and level 4, which is far below, for all 5, so I didn't meet competency on any of these, but that's okay, because to be honest, I didn't have too much time to study last week. I went into this feeling like I really understood the topics, but I didn't have time to get into the details, and I wish that I had, so I can't wait to study for this one again later in my year. So then, looking at this week, week 3, I'm going into project development and documentation. In the order of the exams, as per the Airy 5.0 handbook, this one is right after project planning and design, and that's intentional. That's because project planning and design and project development and documentation have a lot of overlaps. I highly recommend that you study for these 2 consecutively. Based on my research on the Airy 5.0 community, some people prefer doing PDD first, which is this one. Some people prefer doing project planning and design first, which is referred to as PPD. But the moral of the story is PPD touches everything at a more general scale, whereas project development and documentation, as you can see from the title, is really honing in on the details. You're getting into the specifics of different wall sections, the specifics of different systems, and you really have to understand everything from project planning and design in order to get into this one. So let's look at some of the specifics. you'll start to see a lot of the same categories from the last one overlapping into this one. It assesses objectives related to the integration and documentation of building systems, material selections, which are really critical with regards to how a building performs and how it relates to its context, and then material assemblies. So the 5 sections are integration of building materials and systems, construction documentation, project manual and specifications, codes and regulations, and construction cost estimates. So the first section, as you can see, is more related to project planning and design than any of the others, I would say. Maybe codes and regulations and construction cost estimates as well, but the 2 new ones that are being introduced this week are construction documentation and project manual and specifications. What that's referencing are the actual documents and sets of information that you'd be producing in your firm for a project. You have to know where in those documents you'd be able to find details. You have to know where you're actually showing your client and showing the contractor where certain details are and where certain elements are in those drawing sets. Just like PPD, this exam has 120 items or 120 questions. The test duration is 4 hours and 15 minutes, and the entire appointment duration is 5 hours. I've already illustrated in the past 2 weeks, but if you're new to this campaign and just tuning in for the first time, the reason that 5 hours is longer than 4 hours and 15 is because you get one 15-minute break, you have about 10 minutes to sign the NCARB agreement at the beginning, and then there's a few questions at the end to basically just assess how you felt about the exam. Those questions at the end are not graded, they're simply for NCARB so that they can actually do some statistical data collection of how people feel about their exams. And then you can also see the breakdown, a percentage breakdown of how much of the exam will be on each of the subjects. The vast majority of this exam is on the first 2 sections, so integration of building materials and systems, and then construction documentation. But there's still about 12 to 18% on project manual and specifications, 8 to 14% on codes and regulations, and 2 to 8% on construction cost estimates. So it's really important that you learn all 5 for the exam, but I'm definitely going to be putting most of my attention on those first 2, just based on this percentage breakdown. That sort of starts to give you an overview of what this exam is covering, and then just as per usual, you can use the Airy 5.0 handbook to zoom in on each of those sections, get a feel for what the objectives are, get a feel for whether NCARB will be quizzing you on analysis and evaluation, or understanding and application. Those are 2 very different methods of testing your knowledge, but all of them are really strategic and intentional. So looking at how I'm going to study this week, what I've already been doing, as I mentioned for PPD, I'm looking at the Black Spectacles videos as an intro to all of the topics and to really just get an understanding of what all of these sections are covering. This exam has the most videos of all 6. There's 36 hours and 17 minutes. Obviously, I'm only allotting 5 days of my week to studying, so I'm watching these videos at 1.5 or 2 times speed to really try and get all of it in, but unlike last week, I'm really going to be dedicating a lot of time to external test materials and books and subjects, because I'm really learning that in order to actually go into these exams feeling confident and being able to execute all the questions, you have to really get into that detailed method of thinking. You have to understand how to calculate a bunch of things. You have to be able to consolidate all of the resources and come to conclusions with a really intelligent mindset. You have to be able to assess it based on context. You have to be able to assess it based on climate. You have to be able to assess it based on use in particular too, so like the occupancy of a building type, for instance. In addition to those 36 hours of videos, there are 1,213 flashcards. So compared to last week, with the about 630, if I remember correctly, you can see how robust this exam is. Most people that I'm starting to learn on the 5.0 community are really struggling at these 2 exams in particular. So as you're structuring your 6 exams and going into your path to licensure, be mindful that these 2 exams are definitely the most robust, definitely the most complex, and will definitely take the most studying. And that's fine, and I think that comes with the territory, because it's kind of the largest chunk of the design process. If you can't master these 2, can you really design a project to protect the health, safety, welfare of the public? I think not. So, zooming into the Airy 5.0 community, I'm looking at this earlier rather than later to start to see what people are recommending. When you're looking at the community, you can sort posts by newest posts, recent activity, votes, and comments. I'm choosing to look at them based on votes because that's starting to show me, okay, if this post got 24 votes, that means that a lot of people thought this was really helpful. So looking at that post in particular, this is a really robust summary of how somebody felt they did after their second take on the exam. They failed the first time, passed the second time, and decided to share their strategies. I've been scrolling through this, and it's been reiterating that a lot of the books that were recommended for PPD are the same as for PDD, but BCI, which is the Building Construction Illustrated, is apparently the Bible for this one. So obviously I'll be using the Architect Studio Companion just like I should have been last week, but BCI is apparently much more pertinent for this exam because it starts to get into the construction details and starts to get into all of those specifics that are really relevant for project development and documentation. Something else that I'm learning from this particular post is some of the key info and key topics you should be focusing on. So I'm going to talk about these a little bit just for anybody who's prepping to take their exam or who'll be looking back on this video in the future. So for project development and documentation, you're going to want to know a lot of mechanical details and mechanical systems, plumbing, electrical and lighting, structures, partition types for different circumstances, the locations of different vapor barriers based on climate, coordination of different systems, knowing where the responsibilities lie, contract documents, historical preservation. You can tell that it's a lot, and it all comes down to knowing how to match details to correct conditions, knowing how to pull together a construction set, and being able to actually read those drawings and find certain aspects of the design, and then estimating costs based on changes to the design process. So then there's obviously a bunch of different posts that people have done documenting post-exam notes and recommendations. I highly encourage you all to utilize these as you're going through your process because they're really great. I found one post in particular that was somebody actually decided to create a Google Drive folder for sharing of resources and materials. This folder is called the NCARB Community Airy 5.0 Shared Notes, and there's hundreds of people on this folder, and I can't wait to watch how this folder grows over the next few months as people are putting in their own resources. So definitely utilize the 5.0 community because you're not alone on this process. Whether or not you have friends in your area or friends at your firm that are also studying, you have friends across the country who are also studying, who are sharing their basic information, brain dumps, some members and structural design tips, as well as fire resistant stuff. Because if I didn't mention it enough last week, something that's really pertinent to these two exams is how to make sure that your project is actually up to code with regards to fire resistance and all of that good stuff. So just like last week, and for all future weeks, I'm going to also be throwing you guys a new resource and a new test prep material provider. Because what I'm learning as the weeks are going on is that one prep provider is not enough. Two might not even be enough. To be honest, especially for project planning and design and project development and documentation, you're going to want to utilize a bunch of different resources that you really feel confident going into these exams. So for this one, and the last one, I'm looking at Hyperfine as well. Hyperfine is a resource that actually makes these take-home test-style quizzes. And what that allows you to do is dive into certain case studies and questions and really apply your knowledge. It's not just reading, it's not just sample questions, but it's taking it to that next level, pretending you're actually working on a project in studio or doing something like that. And if you don't have the time to do all of that, like I don't, for instance, this week, they also have a bunch of free resources on here that I think you should all utilize. So one of the blog posts that I've been looking at is 10 things to know for the Airy of the 2015 IBC. And that's because throughout the case studies for the last couple exams, I've spent an inordinate amount of time scrolling through the IBC when I really should have already known where these tables are, where all these things are that you're going to need on the exam. So some of the things that they're calling out that you definitely need to know are required separation of occupancies. This goes back to fire ratings and fire separations. So you're definitely going to want to understand what types of buildings are classified as different occupancy types, how those occupancy types relate to the required separation, and then going beyond that, what other details do you need for either ADA accessibility or fire rating? Is it dead-end corridors, common paths of travel, door locations and projections into corridors? If you didn't know, most doors need to open in the path of egress, so when you're trying to escape a building, for instance, in a fire, you probably want those doors to open outwards. That's another detail that you're probably going to want to know. Then they even reference ramp slopes, because for ADA accessibility, there are certain slopes that might be too steep for a wheelchair to go on. There are certain slopes that require a landing. All that kind of stuff that you're definitely going to want to know off the top of your head. You don't want to have to go into the codes to remember. You're going to want to know that because it'll probably come up on quizzes. They also go into more firewalls, barriers, atriums, all that sort of stuff. So this particular blog post is really useful. And then another one is they actually share other online resource links. So this includes online links to the code, to FEMA, which I shared last week. The FEMA document is designing for earthquakes. And I didn't really go into that last week because I was under the assumption that, okay, if you're really handling earthquakes, that's probably only going to be in California, right? That's only that external exam. Wrong. In order to actually design a building, you have to be prepared for a bunch of different load requirements, both lateral as well as live and dead loads from people in the building. So when I'm talking about lateral loads, that's like winds as well as earthquakes. How to make your building structurally stable for different external factors. And that's where this document comes in really handy. The 2010 ADA Standards for Accessible Design, that's where it deals with accessibility. You want to read that to get familiar with the different diagrams and the different requirements for doors swinging outwards, doors swinging inwards. The method of approach to a door actually impacts the measurements that are required on the different sides of the door for a handicapped individual to be able to get into those doors. So all of these documents are really helpful, and then this one is UL wall assemblies for fire ratings and just to really get to know different wall assemblies and how they relate. It also shares some AIA contract stuff, some other videos, practice tests, and other stuff. Just to show you a few examples of videos, Hyperfine also does YouTube videos. Take advantage of YouTube. They're quick and easy, and they talk about certain things that you might not feel confident in, but that you really should feel confident in going into the exam. So for instance, last week, I didn't really master how to deal with fire separation and where that is in the code. So I'm going to be watching this video so that I know that going into this week. Another video I'll be looking at is formulas and concepts. You think that you don't need to know that many formulas going into these exams, but to be honest, there are some things you do need to know how to calculate, like loads on different structural beams, or how to find where the maximum shear or the moment is at peak for different structural members. So that's where I will be utilizing Hyperfine's videos for that. And then just one other video resource that I wanted to share with you all is Dartmouth X. This is a little bit extreme, and only do this if you really want to get to know structures or that's one of your weaknesses. But I'm looking at this because structures, I'm realizing I haven't really focused on since third year. So I definitely am going to be watching these, remembering how to calculate if a column can support a load, and all that good stuff. So, in summary, project development and documentation takes all of the information that you need to study for project planning and design and takes it one step further. It takes it beyond that more generalistic viewpoint of how to pull all these resources, how to pull all these different contexts and systems together, and it zooms into the specificity, and you actually have to be able to find different areas of wall sections where you might be at a risk of moisture, or you might be at a risk of infiltration, and all that good stuff. And you definitely need to understand all the different systems and all the different things that come into determining what system is appropriate for a project in order to tackle this exam. So I'm going to be looking through my Black Spectacles videos to get that overview, looking through my ballast guide again to just look at some sample questions, but I'm definitely going to be spending a lot of time reviewing the codes, reviewing these external documents, and making sure that I feel confident going into those case studies. So yeah, welcome to week 3. I'll be tune in again on Wednesday to hear how I'm doing and if I found any other resources. But I hope these are helpful for you, and we'll see how this week goes. Thanks for tuning in. Bye, guys.